Hey friends, it's Chris Larson. I'm going to attempt a short video in contrast to the other ones. So here goes. There's been a lot of campaign stuff going on. Election day is Tuesday, depending on when you see this, 7 a.m. to 8 p.m. Go vote, make your plan to vote. If you don't have a plan to do that, it's important to vote regardless of who you're voting for. That's how democracy works. There hasn't been a lot of vetting going into where David Crowley stands on issues. Which I found interesting considering there was this idea that the establishment said, this is an unobjectionable candidate. This is a guy that we should all get behind. I thought at some point there would be an examination of his policies and some of the things that he has put out there in the public sphere. That hasn't really happened. We're a day before the election as I record this, so I'm going to dive into a few of those things that living in Milwaukee, I know, and a lot of people know. But you might not. So, number one, David Crowley is the only candidate to refuse to repeal the $2 billion tax cut for data centers. Part of this may be that the $350,000 that he got from interest groups immediately after his re-entrance into the race came from the same groups that are building data centers. But even Tom Tiffany has said that he would repeal that $2 billion sales tax break. Number two, David Crowley is the only candidate who put his hand up during the debate when asked who would support Tony Evers' budget-busting surplus to a deficit bill in May. This would have led to a $2.9 billion projected deficit at a time when dollars at the state level are really important to have just to make sure that we are getting through if the economy crashes. And beyond that, Trump's federal government is, of course, using federal dollars as leverage to try and get horrible regressive policies passed, refusing to put money into blue states. So having those funds makes more sense than just spending them away for a headline. Of that break, we can dive into it. I've written about this, but one third of workers in the state would not have gotten a single penny. Most of it have gone to people who are earning the most. Number three, one of David Crowley's signature accomplishments is from his own research, his own literature, is something called Act 12. This is a bill that passed a few years ago that got additional dollars locally, great, but it didn't get as much locally here as other communities across the state got. It also had a number of other provisions in it that people might not even realize. And I think it's worth talking about because this is something he's celebrating. Number one is the advisory referendums are no longer allowed in the state of Wisconsin. Number two, it costs Milwaukee more than the rest of the state. It only helped temporarily so that money is still already drying up. There's projected losses in our parks, further projected cuts to our transit system. It also ignored a district-passed policy that was lobbied for and pushed by students to stop the school to prison pipeline, and instead of having cops in classrooms, having education professionals, which is what they wanted. They passed that at the local level. Act 12 bigfooted on them and said you actually have to have 25 cops in schools, and you're probably going to have to pay for those whether you want them or not. Kids weren't at the table for that discussion. Local officials weren't at the table for that discussion. That was just something that was passed in Act 12. And the last one is at a time where people are demanding, especially in the Democratic coalition, are demanding greater accountability for police when they are abusing their power. Act 12 eliminated civilian oversight over the police chief, which is a huge safeguard in making sure that the public is heard when things happen. Instead, it gave that authority directly to the police chief to do as he saw fit, who is an appointee of the mayor. So eliminating that civilian oversight, which had been a model. So that was all in Act 12, and a lot of people may realize. As far as recent budgets go, looking what he had proposed, he has eliminated something called the right to counsel, which allows for people who are being evicted to have an attorney through that process. Can be a very damaging experience to be evicted, and every budget he's eliminated it. They've been putting it back in by the county board, but that's $100,000 of help that has been pulled out that he has done every time. At the same time, 5 times that amount is the amount that he has spent on a PR firm to promote a building to be built near the courthouse. That is just the PR. That's just public relations on this to try and sell it to the public. this building that has ballooned in cost and is now projected to be $890 million for one building. This would make it harder to bond for other buildings or other construction projects in the county, including parks projects. It would make it more expensive and probably stop those from even happening. When this was possible to go to referendum to ask the public if they wanted to spend $890 million on one building, allies of the county executive shut this down in committee and did not allow it to go for a vote. So the second time referendums have been shut down. That's, I think, important to know. I've not heard that much from folks on that. Another big one that people might not remember is Milwaukee was the only community in the country that was still willing to host the Republican National Convention. Other cities had dropped out, saying that they did not want to be bringing in the folks who are part of the Republican coalition, especially when they're so rabidly anti-Semitic, white supremacists, violent. And as a result, when the RNC came to down, business plummeted. A lot of businesses were hurting. A lot of waiters, waitresses, bartenders saw a huge dip in what they were making. Restaurants lost out. People who were putting money and hoping that this would actually help them were hurt by it. That was something that he was part of that coalition to bring them here. So all of these things, I think it's who is at the table. Every compromise isn't good. Just because something is bipartisan doesn't make it beneficial. We are at a time where the problems are severe. We need to have real solutions that respond to the public, respond to what they want, not just what the special interests are looking for, not just what big money is trying to put a politician in office for. And I think that's usually the case. People recognize that seldom are those interests aligned. The thing the rich folks want usually doesn't help the people who are struggling the most. And this is not the last thing. This is not the first time that David Crowley has been helped by big special interests. The money that's coming in to support him now, that had happened when he first ran for county executive. We're in that race. There were outside groups that supported him, that supported the vouchers, anti-public education folks, and one rich individual with an axe to grind spent over $1 million, and together they spent more than every candidate had spent in that race combined, and put David Crowley over the top by 1%. So I think if you are looking for a candidate that is not beholden to special interests, is going to push back against big money, Francesca Hong is your candidate. She has done a fantastic job of building a people first coalition that is out hitting the streets and growing. I encourage you to go vote for whoever you want. There are definitely some advantages to voting for any of the candidates, but because none of these things had been out and fully vetted in the public, I want to make sure that these were out there, that just because the establishment is behind a candidate doesn't mean they don't have a record that they would have to go out and explain. Because things are happening really quickly, I thought it was pretty important to put this out there. So if you find it beneficial, let me know. If you need sources, you can look up most of these things with a quick Google search, but they're out there. Otherwise, if you can't message, I'll try and check them as much as I can and get back to folks. But remember to vote. Coalition is growing. Let's win tomorrow, and then let's move on to the general election and win this November. Thank you.